So welcome everybody. We're about to start our second pre-IC session. So this one is about showing research. So Martha, if you want to go ahead and start.
Okay, well, welcome and thanks for joining us. It's early for me. I don't know about the rest of you. So today we have two topics. The first is working with students to show their research in their global issues booklets. And then the second will be about showing more futuristic ideas and so forth. But first on showing research, this is an area that I think it's important, and it's challenging for students to do it. So when I read and evaluate booklets, I feel like it's not that often that I really see a lot of research shown in the booklets, and I'm pretty strict on that. So I'm usually scoring really low, excuse me. But let's look at some ideas. So I guess I have to start it like this. One of the first ways is for students to integrate topic related who's and their solutions. And this is one I added in for this year because somebody asked a lot of questions about this last time we talked about this topic. This will help a little bit. This isn't like a major way to show research, but it can help somewhat. And I'm gonna, okay. All right, I gotta move this out of the way so I can. Is there a way for me to, here. Excuse me, people, I'm having trouble seeing my slide. There, I got it. All right.
And then I think you skipped one forward.
Yep. All right, thank you. Oh no. Let's just double check. Is that, yeah. Wait a minute. Yep. Okay. Okay, so some of this is an overlap from the last session where we just talked about using the RRR to, do the research with students and so forth. But one of the ways is to just, as you're researching, reading articles, whatever, watching videos, maybe even reading books for older kids, as you read and discuss the topic research, starting to keep a list of the who's and with descriptions, so the students will know who they are. And there's probably still time, if you haven't done this, okay, to do a little before IC. And then once you have a kind of good list going, to sort that list into like individuals, experts kind of people, organizations, stakeholder groups, etc. Then an acronym that we use here in Wisconsin, and I think a lot of other people do, is talking to students with which who's have the pie. So that would be the power, the interest, and the expertise to implement improvements in this topic area. And so if you decide, okay, here are some in each group that might really have the pie. And those types of people tend to not be, for example, the children of current celebrities. We get that sometimes. So that is not really the who that you're looking for. And once you've looked at some of them, to kind of discuss, now, how are these ones specific to this topic area? And what are some things that they might be able to do? Another ongoing project, I think, for students, and this might be especially for juniors and middles, but some seniors too, as an ongoing project, keeping a list of scientists and then government. And for this topic, specifically what type of scientists might be related to it, and or what type of government levels or agencies might be related to it, because for me, that shows like a little bit more level of understanding of the research. We certainly get a lot of scientists will do this and the government will do that. So this is an area that you can develop with students to understand that there's a lot more specifics in those two big areas. Then you want to practice with the who. So if you have a future scene or you've brainstormed solutions to a practice future scene, you can, talk about, okay, who would be an appropriate who to implement each idea, and ask them to use some of the who's to write solutions. And looking at your list of who's and saying, how might these who's change in the future? Okay, so if we had a related who, what might it be? Or looking back at students' past solutions. That's what worked for me a lot, was let's look at the solutions that you put in your most recent booklet, okay, and see if, we have some good who's there, if we could have improved them, or could there be better ones. So a few things to avoid is that acronym companies with no context. So sometimes students like to make up an acronym that sort of fits the topic, but there's no really context about what that organization might do. So just to add, like who makes up that organization or what their function is can be helpful. Unrelated celebrities or their future relatives is a good thing to avoid. Maybe he's not current right now, but for a while they were getting, a lot of children of Justin Bieber, okay, who would be doing the different solutions. Another one is overusing the future scene organizations and people. So we certainly get a lot of booklets where, the main organization in the future scene, which often there is one, is used over and over and over. Okay, this company will do this company will do that, this company will do such and such. And so, that shows that they're looking at the future scene, but it doesn't show research knowledge much. The other thing about that would be to talk with kids about, if you're going to use the company, who within the company, okay, might be the people that would be implementing that. In a hospital, would it be the doctors, the nurses? Would there be other people, who hire people, or who would be doing that? So a stronger way to start to show research is to integrate some of the specialized vocabulary terms. And for this, when I look at the list of vocabulary, let's say out of the RRR, to me, there are really familiar words sometimes, and then the really unfamiliar words. So on this topic, when I looked at the vocabulary, there's probably more unfamiliar words to me, but still there's some that might be kind of familiar, possibly, especially with older students who might know more about some of this Bitcoin type thing than I do. But anyway, some of the familiar ones might be like Bitcoin, contactless payment, the word currency, exchange rate, investment, transaction. Those are things that, I might expect people to maybe sort of know before they study the topic. But ones that would be really specific to the topic, and even I don't know what some of these mean yet, because I'm not going to be evaluating, so I haven't really studied this topic. Blockchain, crypto mining, I've heard of that. I don't understand how it works. Ethereum, fiat currency, ledger technology, non-fungible tokens, stablecoin. So it would be that kind of unfamiliar, terms that would do a better job, of showing research in a booklet. So what could you do with those once you've identified them? Not just from the RRR, but also, from other research that you're doing with students. So you want to practice connecting those terms to writing, so the students have some experience doing that. So here's just one activity you could do. Give a list of terms to pairs of students, and maybe not a whole list, okay? But maybe, like, let's say 3, 4, 5, okay? Announce one of those terms and have each pair create and record either a challenge or a solution that uses the term, either based just on their topic knowledge or as applied to an article that you have read or as applied to a practice feature scene you might be working with. And then have each pair share their work. I think for this kind of an activity, it's helpful for kids to work in pairs instead of like as a whole group of 4. It's just a little bit easier for everyone to become active in doing this, and that, but yet they have somebody to talk to. And then, you know, you could announce another term and repeat. And maybe it says 3 to 5 terms per session, but maybe even only 2 or 3 or whatever. So once they get ready for booklet writing, okay, potentially, depending on the age of your students, each student might choose 1 to 4 of those terms to kind of memorize and keep in mind. And then as they're working on their booklet, okay, they could try to look for a place that they could use that term when they're writing challenges and solutions, and even their action plan, even their criteria sometimes. But for them not to worry if they can't find it, but sometimes that's just a way to kind of split up the work and each person be responsible for trying to think of something. So the strongest way to show research is really to integrate knowledge, okay, of the topic, information into their challenges or solutions. And so this is much more advanced. And I worked on this mostly with senior teams and a little bit with middle teams. I don't know if I would do a lot of this with junior teams, but your kids going to IC probably are pretty strong and maybe more advanced than beginners. But with beginners, this might be a little bit too much. So, and that is to do these nuggets. For me, this is like a really nice way to kind of work on this. So a nugget would be like an important concept, event, or information related to the topic under study. Now, here's examples. On the left, there is an article summary from Sports Medicine. This was a topic a while ago. And I've highlighted in red, okay, some of the information there that could be turned into a nugget. So at that first one, it says, overall, there's little consistency in the information and methods taught in different sports medicine training programs. So that's one little piece of information that could be a nugget. So you'll see that on the right. Most of them are between 40 and 160 hours of participation, okay? But a lot of them said they were dissatisfied. That's another nugget. And 60% wish they had trained with more specialized individuals. So that's kind of a way to pull out from either the summaries or the articles or whatever you're reading, some little nuggets, and then you can work with those. So here is taking a couple of those nuggets and showing how they might be used in challenges. This would be challenges. So those training programs being between 40 and 160 hours, and 20% of the doctors are dissatisfied. So it could start out, a survey taken in 2000 showed that 20% of doctors in sports medicine programs lasting from 40 to 160 hours were dissatisfied with the curriculum. Since the SAMS program, and that is the organization running the training in the future scene that for this topic, is only 140 hours long, participants may also be dissatisfied with the training. And as a result, they may not have the confidence they need to adequately treat patients. And by the way, you don't need to be writing this stuff down, because you will, you know, what's on the screen here, you will get a copy of these slides that you'll have access to afterwards. And there's a couple more examples here of how you might take that little nugget of information. This kind of shows where they could go in different places. Let's look at the second one, I guess. It's not clear what is included in the SAMS training programs. That's information from the future scene. The trainees may not have enough experience working with other sports specialists or treating actual patients, and consequently, their skills may not be as strong as they should. Now, that would be a very decent challenge, but the additional of this would be similar to a situation from research when 60% of doctors who completed sports medicine training wish they had trained more with specialists. And that would be the nugget that would increase the pay they're showing research. The next one kind of puts it in the middle. The need for sports medicine specialists is increasing through the promotion of sports by the DSC, which was an organization in the future scene. And then in the middle, a research study from the early 2000s found there was little consistency in the information and methods taught in sports medicine training programs. So, and then it would be finishing off the challenge. If this is also true of the various SAMS training programs, there could be a wide variety of quality in the services provided to athletes. So as a result, the athletes may not get the best treatment for their injuries. So those are just a few examples of how you can take these little nuggets and either put them at the beginning or the end or the middle of a challenge. These are just a couple more examples using a topic of extreme sports, and this was some based on a future scene we actually wrote here in Wisconsin for kids to practice with. And once again, these are some of the nuggets on the left, and on the right, it shows different ways to include those nuggets from the research into the challenges. These are some pretty advanced nuggets here, so just a few more examples. These are taken from an actual book. So I had the pleasure of working with some students all the way from like 5th or 6th grade through their senior year. So when they're in high school for research, we would take the RRR, they would read that 1 week, and then we'd go on to other things, longer articles, and then even books. So this was a book that we read, okay, for the background on human rights. And it was all about Rwanda and stuff. But it was about courageous resistance, the power of ordinary people. So a couple of examples here. In Rwanda, many Hutu civilians began killing their Tutsi countrymen because they're encouraged by incendiary rhetoric on the radio. Or citizens in this remote thing sheltered a lot of people because their ministers, okay, had taught them to respect everyone. One thing that happened is that members of the Tutsi minority were talked into gathering in central locations. They thought it was for their safety, but then it allowed them to be slaughtered more efficiently, which was horrible. So this whole thing in Rwanda was pretty bloody and violent. But this would be some ways to use that information in challenges. Now, my students and I worked on these challenges and solutions, but they weren't based on a future scene. They were just based in general on some things that we were learning about the topic of human rights. So, for example, in Rwanda, many Hutu civilians began killing their Tutsi countrymen because they're encouraged by incendiary rhetoric on the radio. So if some of the leaders are skilled at whipping people into a frenzy with their speeches, some people may go along with the perpetrators of abuse, even if they wouldn't normally condone such things. So, an example of how to kind of use that research nugget, and a couple more examples here too that you can certainly take a look at when you get that copy of the slide. So I won't read through all of them. Now here's a second set of nuggets from that book. The owner of a hotel used alcohol to bribe and soften up the militia and the military officers so they wouldn't search out the people he was keeping hidden there in his hotel. Or on the right, many people adopt an attitude of passive bystander, whether they agree with the injustice or not, because they think there's a risk to themselves, but also that there's kind of like a crossroads where people have to decide. Either perpetrate the injustice, become a passive bystander, which, related to the one on the right, tends to support the perpetrators actually, or become a courageous resistor, which is challenging for a lot of people. But these were some ideas that we then use to, practice putting into solutions. So, for example, the first one showing about the owner of a hotel in Rwanda who used that, bribing. So a solution could be similar. Some of the leaders of a citizen resistance group will make friends with the government enforcers so they can party with them and distract them from finding out about the group's plans. for helping people, or this whole thing about the crossroads and having to decide. Global World Today, which was something we had read about, an international journal available on all mobile devices, will highlight the actions of a courageous resistor each week, and this will increase awareness of the consequences of the various choices at these crossroad points, so they will feel empowered to join the resistance against injustice. Well, sorry, I got a frog in my throat today. So examples of using them in solutions. But it's harder sometimes to use research information in solutions because you might have gathered a lot, but your solutions are being targeted at one single action goal. And so they're not as wide ranging. So how do you gather these research nuggets? You can, of course, take them from any research source. The summaries and the RRR, longer articles, videos you're watching, speakers you listen to, books students are reading, maybe if they're seniors, okay. And there's a couple ways then you could, I usually did a lot with paper divided into 8 sections, okay, for them to write the nuggets, and a different nugget in each section. Use the same kind of paper to actually brainstorm challenges and brainstorm solutions. But 3x5 cards or post-it notes, okay, can, post-it notes especially can be pretty flexible. Now, if you really want to do it up big, one thing would be to type the nuggets and then print them on, let's say, paper or cardstock so you can cut them apart. And then with the students, one thing you could do is sort them into categories, either by the FPSPI categories or by the topic themes from the RRR, or by some other category specific to the topic, by saying like which of these kind of relate to each other or which are sort of similar, and put them into categories. And sometimes that can be helpful for students to remember, okay, in this grouping of nuggets, there were these different pieces of information. And then you can practice a number of different ways. If you have a practice future scene, have students read the scene and then give a set of the nuggets, maybe 3 or 4 nuggets, or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever, to each group of 2 or 3 students, and challenge them to write either a challenge or solution to that future scene that includes the nugget, and share. Or you can have them create a future scene, okay, provide, let's say, 5 to 8 nuggets to each group of 3 or 4. They should read them aloud, and then they can think, okay, what could be a future scene that might incorporate those nuggets? And this one isn't so much about practicing putting them into challenges or solutions, but just becoming familiar with the information. And this would not need to be a written future scene. Okay, it just could be something that they do round robin, like somebody starts it and somebody adds on, that kind of a thing. And you could have them, share however you want. When you're preparing for competition, sometimes my students like to make guesses about which of these might be relevant to what they thought the future scene might be, as far as setting the topic into the future. Just like on the vocabulary words, each student in a team could choose, let's say, 2 to 4 nuggets to remember. This is especially helpful, like maybe throughout the year, to get practice with that. And then they would try to integrate those somewhere if they could. But it's hard to expect, if you've done like a lot of research and you've pulled out a lot of little nuggets of information, for kids to like to remember all of that. So as they get to the competition, for each one to kind of, pick a few that they're going to really try to remember. Now they might remember more, but just to try and think of the whole, all of them at once, sometimes is hard for kids, and they're so focused on writing their competition booklet that it's hard for them to think of that wide range of what you've been working with. So here's a few examples from an actual student competition booklet. This was on trade barriers. This was quite a few years ago now. Okay, I've been retired for a while. And this is a booklet that my students wrote when they did this topic, and this was one of the hardest topics for me that I ever worked with on the kids. And of course, I never know that much about the topics before we get started on the research, but on the upper right, since the UK has established an import embargo along with a large tariff on exports, the number of countries still willing to pay for UK-made goods may significantly decrease. And so this would be similar to the US after World War I. The US was undergoing isolationism, which meant they no longer received foreign goods. Eventually, fewer and fewer countries bought US goods, which proved to be a main factor in the Great Depression. So as a result, the UK may undergo some serious economic decline. Now, we did read books for this topic, but these were high school students who are also taking economic classes. And so by this time, they were actually starting to notice in their classes things that related to the various topics that we had done over several years. And so they actually were able to pull information from their economics classes in addition to the things that we read. On the left, something we really read quite a bit about as far as one theory was the idea of comparative advantage. That countries should make what they're best at and trade for other goods, even if they're capable of making those other goods they're trading for. And this method was used in the 21st century, specifically with the US and China. The US would develop technology, software, and pharmaceuticals, et cetera, and trade with China for factory goods, because that was what each country excelled in. So that was their research information. And then since Britain's trade has been so restricted, they are being forced to make the most of their goods. And as a result, to make most of their goods. As a result, their economy may suffer even more so than they currently are because they aren't utilizing the ideas of comparative advantage. So just, some examples there. So, as far as all of these, I mean, this isn't something that you can just jump in with. And perhaps those of you who are online here have tried some of these kinds of things with your students. You can't jump in 2 weeks before I see, have them become experts at it, but you could do a little bit of this, take a few nuggets and just kind of practice, or also adapting the strategies, of course, to the age and experience of your students. And if you're looking ahead to next year, start really small, and then throughout the year, you can kind of grow their experiences with looking at that. And sometimes it is helpful to go back and look at a past booklet, a recent past booklet, because maybe the research would be clear in their minds. And then if you had been working with nuggets during that, you could look back at a past booklet and say, okay, here's all the nuggets we gathered. Okay. And can you find places in your booklet where you might have been able to use one of these and you just didn't think of it? So looking back at past booklets, I used a lot as far as what can we improve, not just here, but a lot of other things as well. So does anyone have any questions on this topic? I don't hear any voices. So I'll assume no questions, and we will go on to the other topic. Oops. Okay, this one is about ways to enhance a future perspective. And once again, if you work with students over a year or over several years, I really enjoyed being able to work with students over several years. For a while, I had after school work with students in the middle school, even though I was working at the high school, and then I continued on with those kids as they came up to the high school. But I always wish that I had done more than I did as far as enhancing a future perspective. I tried some of these things from time to time, so they're all suggestions. But if you have, work with students over a period of time, then you can really think about doing some things to enhance that future perspective. One thing would be, as a long-term project, would be to gather kid-friendly resources. And it's maybe not as easy as you might think. So I'm thinking, you know, online resources, over time, build a collection that are easy to use with students. When I was working on this presentation, I Googled a lot of things and I clicked on a lot of links and reading through and like, this is not kid friendly. Some of them were not Martha Barlow friendly either. I mean, they were like too technical or just too much information, or, you know, I couldn't really put my head around them. I'm just going to click on one of these and kind of show you an example. So this is the Future 100 2023. So this organization kind of comes out with this. Last year it was, I had the Future 100 2022 and they were different. But then they have these little things like culture, okay, elevated expressionism, you know, tech in the metaverse. So I like this where they have pictures with them, okay, and a little information about something that might be happening in the future. So this would be, you know, one way to start collecting resources. So in the materials that Allison will give you a link to afterwards, I've actually put PDFs of the Future 100, 2023 and 2022, the 10 hot consumer trends, and a couple of other things too. This one is interesting. Welcome to the Internet of Senses. I thought that was interesting. And then they have some trends, you know, your brain being the user interface, how we listen to sounds makes a difference, and so forth. So getting access to, or keeping a list of links that you think wouldn't be that challenging for kids to read, or you can discuss with them. Another thing you can do though with that is to make create a collection, okay, where you like all those things that I just showed you. Maybe you would make a copy of the picture, find your own picture with a little blurb, and, you know, make a collection. I mean, if you were in classrooms with kids, it could be a physical collection, but it might also be an online, you know, type of collection. I don't know, in a Google Doc or whatever you're using. You know, you're looking for trends and inventions, predictions, technology. So here's just a little, you know, some examples might be in a collection. So global markets, micro-national small businesses will dominate the global markets by quickly implementing new products. Because they're so small, they don't have to go through all the red tape, and, you know, it sometimes takes large corporations a long time to make changes and so forth. But this is saying that there's just going to be a lot of really small groups of people with expertise that would be able to really move quickly. Meta societies, a digital reality that reflects our physical lives or better versions of it is coming soon. And we actually, I've seen this kind of coming through in some scenarios from our kids and so forth. Microforests, mini forests will spring up in urban environments. So that would be a new form of public space. So these were some of the predictions from the 2022 and 2023 things about the future. So if you have these resources, or you maybe have created a collection, some immediate activities you could do with them, or other activities as well. One is called Future Force Fit, and those would be select random items from the collection and challenge students to force the items into challenges or solutions for the topic or a future scene, and then repeat that at intervals. So if we looked at those three that I took out, things, force fit, okay, could we force fit each of these ideas into a challenge or a solution related to currency? So, you know, global markets, we could, if I had a better understanding of this topic, I might be able to come up with a way that if these small businesses are really getting things quickly onto the market and so forth, maybe some of the, global currency and how that works would be moving more through these small businesses than through the larger corporations, and that might have some kind of impact. Or the meta societies, if people are kind of spending time, a long time ago it was like Second Life. Well, it's sort of like that idea is maybe coming back around. If people spend time in a digital reality, or like one of our future scenes where they weren't seeing the real world, they were seeing like sort of the digital overlays on it. If they were doing that, then there would maybe be something about how what kind of currency they would be using within that society. That would be maybe different from in the outside real world. So there might be ways to force fit some of these ideas into a challenge or a solution. Not sure about the microforests, how I could fit that in necessarily, but for kids to get practice with this kind of over time kind of stretches their mind. One of my colleagues did this force fit thing. She was lucky enough to have an actual class in the middle school for future problem solving. So they would do a lot of practice with this, and they would practice with just like objects around the room. Okay, so here's the topic we're studying, look around the room, and she would just pick an object, and then she'd let the kids pick some too and say, okay, this object, how does this object help you think of something that could be related to this topic? And they would practice this, off and on throughout the year. And she would find that when her kids were writing their booklets, especially in solutions, if they got stuck, she would find them like looking around the room, trying to find something that could like give them an idea. So if kids get familiar with these kind of tools, thinking tools, they can learn to use them. Here's one called imagination brainstorming. So either select a topic or a category, ask students to first brainstorm what's going on in the present, and then brainstorm what will be different in 30 years. And then revisit that occasionally. Like, now that we've studied more about this topic or whatever, or this category within this topic, do you have additional ideas of what might be different? In training with coaches, we sometimes at the beginning of the training have them just in general, how might the world be different in 30 years, like everything. But I think it's helpful with kids to narrow that down a little bit. So for example, maybe you would have some subtopics like over here. So what's going on with shopping right now? And how might shopping be different in the future? Or, what's going on with housing right now, and 30 years from now, how might things be different? So you could even, keep these lists and, like I said, come back and revisit them. And whether or not they're related to this topic, maybe your list will be related to the next topic. So keeping track of them can be helpful. And then, looking back and saying, well, do we have more ideas now about how things might be different in the future? For example, that shopping one makes me think of a book I read a number of years ago called Feed. And in that one, people had implants in their brains. And so all day long, they were getting feed into their brain about products they might be interested related to what they were currently doing, or what they had been interested in the past. Now, that would drive me nuts. It's bad enough that you get those popping up on your phones and your, computers and stuff, but this one, it was in their brains all the time. So another one is future technology. So we use this sometimes in workshops with kids, like if we do a day away, and we'll have them end up the day with doing a future technology activity. So thinking of several solutions that you found in the research on the topic, or you've come up with in a practice feature scene, or you look at your solutions from your last booklet, asking pairs of students to collaborate on inventing a new technology that would help one of the solutions to happen. That could be useful in a solution. And then, so it's a very creative, inventive kind of process. And then having them create a large drawing. I like the, 12 by 18 sheets of paper. using only colored markers and labeling all the parts. Now, I'm a person that likes to have these large drawings with only color and no pencils where they, and, say draw large, where they, draw little things. And I had learned, in somewhere that, our kids are so visual these days, more than perhaps some of us were in our childhoods, and that the color can really activate a part of the brain that pencils don't activate. So that can enhance the creativity a little bit. These are just, some examples of maybe some technology. These are kind of fun. And, if you can pull these out of clip art programs and so forth, and just like look at these and say, do any of these give you ideas for technology that could be used? We have a whole, in one of the publications, this little guy with the light bulbs all over his head, like a thinking cap, reminds me of one of the future scenes in, I think it's Building Blocks for Problem Solving, one of the publications from FPSBI. So what if games are another way, to get kids thinking futuristically. And so creating a list of what if questions, coming up with new ones, keeping a list for, posterity, so you can use them again in the future. So if you have a what if, then thinking about how do you want the students to respond? Do you want them to respond in writing, like a brainstorming Jotboard or something? Do you want them to do a think, pair, share? Just an open discussion, work in partners or work in groups? And then from time to time, just ask one of the questions and let students give it some thought. So some of the, I've seen quite a few publications that have what if suggestions in them, and sometimes they're about the past. What if the Revolutionary War had not happened? What would be different in the world? What if we had not sent anyone into space? What would be different? But for enhancing futurism, we really want to think more into the future. What if there were no schools and all schooling was virtual? Now, kids have a lot of experience with that now. And actually, I think it wasn't as positive an experience that people sometimes thought it might be. But anyway, what if questions, for the future? What if such and such was different? Here's some examples. What if cash disappeared completely? Now that certainly relates to the currency issue that we're talking about. What if plants could let us know what they need? I read something that said that that's a possibility. I can't quite think of it. What if most people live to 140? What if all new buildings must go up, not out? So these would be something for the future. And these kind of what if questions would be more appropriate for really getting kids to think creatively. Now, a futures wheel, is a organized strategy for kind of thinking into the future. So for this one, you would either identify an event, an idea, a trend, a what if. So you could do this with the what if questions. It could be related to the topic if appropriate, but sometimes if you're like thinking about a whole year of prep with kids, it doesn't always have to be related to a topic, because maybe your what if will be related to a topic in the future. You put the short phrase in the center of the circle and then brainstorm possible effects, either positive or negative, for the next layer, and then the next layer. And I'll show you an example of that. Up here it says, don't have the center of the circle be automatically negative. And my example of that is, here's a future wheel with, in the center you put people live to 140. So that's appropriate because there could be positives and negatives on that. But putting in the center bullying isn't as necessarily a good idea, because that's so negative to start off with. And you want to be able to go both directions on the futures wheel. So bullying mostly leads to like only negative stuff. So it should be something more neutral that goes in the center. So for example, the yellow circles here are called the first order effects. Families can enjoy the company of multiple generations. Oh, that would be positive. People may experience more illnesses and diseases. That might be a negative. People can have more experiences in their lives, like travel, positive. It might be hard to finance a very long retirement, potentially negative, but put those in the yellow circles. And then you take each one and you go out to the green circles with a couple more ideas. So if people can have more experiences in their lives, like travel, okay, what might be some effects that could, flow out of that? And then from each of those effects, go out to the pink squares. So you have really 3 levels here, trying to push out into the future. Another thing, especially if you do scenario writing with your students, but even if you don't, reading aloud a scenario writing winner could either be from your affiliate or from the international books that they put out with the scenario winners, or have students read aloud, or have them read it silently, and then discussing the visions for the future in the story. Okay, what in this story was futuristic and positive? What in the story was futuristic and negative? And then for any of the negatives, discussing what could have been done to avoid the negatives. So for the negative pieces, how did they get there? What may have happened along the way to end up like that? And is there any point along the way that things could have gone differently? We find we have a lot of scenario writing in Wisconsin. And we find that for the most part, there's sort of a whole negative view of the future. Like, if things go wrong in this topic area, here's what it might be like. And once in a while, we will get a positive one, which is kind of a joy in a way. But sometimes that's more challenging for students to come up with. But so here's a few of our past winners that might be used for something like this. The Petite Compete is a whole story about kids that were they were getting let me see, they were getting kangaroo DNA and stuff like that to help them become do better at sports. And the end of the story was they turned out to be 4-year-olds. Okay. And so there were pretty negative consequences about that. Conceptual is a story one of our kids wrote about how they were cloning kids, and then this was one of the cloned kids, and how that her challenges in living. Skittles for Callisto, one of my favorite ones, how a girl had grown up on Mars, and so her body had kind of grown quite differently, but then she had to move back to Earth. She'd never been on Earth, and what that experience was like, but it all turned positive as she got relationships with Earth kids and so forth. So using some of the scenarios to be thinking into the future. Now, this is definitely one that I did with my kids quite a bit. So would we visit a past booklet, okay, let's take a look at this booklet we just got our evaluations back from, and let's look at the solutions. And for each one, is there a way we could have made that solution more futuristic? The challenge is that you can't always make futuristic, but you can often make the solutions futuristic and add a futuristic element there. So you could brainstorm with kids, how could we have made those more futuristic so they can apply that then to their next booklet writing? And you could do that right now with your kids going to IC, with their affiliate bowl booklets. And you can also do it with the action plan. And here's an example. One of my kids, one of my teams one time, it was about air transportation, and there were some airplane type things where people stood up, and they could, some of their challenges were they could fall, they could bump, fall into each other, hurt themselves. What would be the solution? Their solution was seatbelts. Okay, so it's like, all right, guys, and this was a practice, and so it didn't matter if I took extra time on it or helped them, which I was like, okay, surely you can think of ways to make this whole seatbelt thing a little more futuristic. So go back, talk it over, and come up with a different solution, because this ended up in their action plan too. So ultimately, they had like harnesses that suspended people in air, and then airbags that would pop open if the plane landed badly, or if it's suddenly slowed down in the air, and things like that. So at least a little bit more futuristic. So here's some examples. That's that one I just mentioned. We see a lot of like students will have classes in this or classes in that to teach them about whatever. So how could you make those more futuristic? Certainly virtual reality lessons, but now kids are sort of used to that. So is there a way to even get that more futuristic? Advertising, is it just normal advertising what we're used to today? Or could you do something like, real-time crowdsourced surveys that I've read about, but that's a little more futuristic. Shopping, when you go in a store, could they hand you glasses? Like if you're not into the whole, everybody has virtual reality glasses now, hand you glasses that as you walk around, they could show you the products that, were available in a more advanced way than just looking at them on a table or hanging up. Meals, 3D printed food, and that amazingly was just recently in a future scene. So some of these things that was on a list I created a while ago actually have ended up in our future scenes. So developing a future perspective, it does take some time. There are some things, you could choose some things out of here that, you could do like even in the next couple of weeks between now and IC with your students to start getting them to think a little bit futuristically. But as you're thinking towards next year and in the next couple of years, if you're continuing to coach, which hopefully you are, kind of thinking, okay, how might over time, how might my, insert a little bit of creative thinking, futuristic kinds of activities along the way to kind of get my students into that mode of thinking for the future. So any questions on this one? I don't hear anyone. So that would be the end of our session today. And you will get some copies of the PowerPoints and some additional things, especially for the futuristic ones, links to those materials.
Yes, and those links will be sent out in the Wednesday IC news along with last week's recording and then the 2 from today. So thank you, Martha, for presenting.
Okay.
There was a lot of really great information in there. And then thank you everybody for coming. So we are having another one today at 4 p.m. Eastern. Yes.
And
if you're free.
That one's about developing underlying problem ideas as you research. So yeah.
Yes. So it's a good thing to bring to IC for sure.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll see you later today, but if not, have a wonderful day.
Okay. Thank everyone.
You.
Bye.